Un mundo tan desafiante, nuestro reto es ser la luz, dar amor día con día.
Ven y seamos esperanza, testimonio de valores, de unidad y de alegría.
Gayla tiene una maestría en psicología y consejería. Ella y su esposo Randy han estado casados desde 1995. Es una familia reconstituida. Ella es madre de 3 hijos y madrastra de 2 jóvenes adultos. Ella es miembro del personal de Family Life Blended, una división de Family Life, fundadora de Step Parenting y cofundadora de Sisterhood de Step Moms. Es escritora, oradora y entrenadora sobre la vida de familias reconstituidas. Es apasionada para acompañar y equipar a estas familias. Gayla, te damos la más cordial bienvenida esta mañana y comenzamos con un aplauso. Gracias.
My name is Gayla Grace. I'm talking today this morning on co-parenting. So this is in the case of divorce, where there is a former spouse in another home and you have children with this spouse and you are trying to understand how to parent together after divorce. Because the reality is divorce does happen. None of us walk to the altar thinking we're going to get divorced, but it does happen. And in my case, I had married a man. We had been married for 11 years. We had 2 young girls together. He was a medical doctor who chose to go down the road of addiction to deal with the medical practice. And a lot of dark circumstances back here that I won't go into, but the bottom line is addiction began to control him. And there were some very harsh consequences as a result of his addiction. Our girls were young. I had been raised in a very stable Christian home. And I wanted to raise my girls in a stable Christian home. My parents were married 65 years before my mom died. And I began to see that as my then husband lost his medical license, never to regain it, that there would be no stability in that home. And I made the very difficult choice to walk through divorce. And then had to learn how to manage when you have children together. Every situation is different, but for the sake of our kids, we want to co-parent well after divorce. It is very important, this co-parenting piece, when we have had kids together and we walk through divorce, is very important for the health of our kids long term. And that's going to be the focus of what I talk about. But because of my journey, because of my first husband's alcoholism and struggles that ended up such harsh consequences, I had a hard time seeing him in a positive light. And if you can't see your ex-spouse in a positive light, you're going to have a really hard time co-parenting well with them. But somehow we've got to figure out how to do that for the sake of our kids. I wasn't looking for another husband after I divorced, but God brought my husband, Randy Grace, into my life. Randy is here with me today, actually running my PowerPoint. And Randy and I have been married 30 years. So let me just say to those of you who walked through divorce, there is also hope of happy remarriage on the other side of divorce. I will talk about reconstituted families in my next session and really what a reconstituted family looks like and how we form relationships in that family. But Randy also had been through divorce and had 2 children. His kids were 5 and 10 when we married. My girls were 3 and 5. And Randy and I had a child together 6 years later, our son Nathan. So we're what is often referred to as a his, hers, and ours family in our reconstituted family. But Randy also had an ex-spouse out here. So each of us had an ex-spouse. And we had to figure out how to manage these back and forth schedules when I had 2 kids and Randy had 2 kids. And life felt very chaotic at times. But what I'm going to do first, I'm going to talk about the goals of co-parenting and how we practically live out those goals. But before I start with that, I'm going to talk about the different kinds of co-parenting relationships and what we're striving for in these relationships. There was a study done by the National Institute of Mental Health that explored how families change after divorce. And Dr. Constance Ahrens concluded there's 5 categories of co-parents. She outlined these in her book, The Good Divorce, and that's where the information comes from when I present about these 5 different kinds of co-parents. And as I present these, I want you to think about which of these categories do you think that you fall into? And which of these categories do you think is best? And I'm going to give you the answer to that, but I'm going to go through these 5 categories first, and I want you to think about that. The first category of co-parents is perfect pals. These parents are high interactors, they're high communicators. Perfect pals still call themselves good friends. They talk with each other once or twice a week. They plan things for each other. They get together often. They might even still celebrate holidays together with their kids. Perfect pals stay well connected with extended families. Perhaps they have joint custody of the kids, so they kind of have equal arrangements in regards to custody. But it's common for these couples to follow this type of relationship early after divorce, but sometimes this changes over time. All right, that's our first category of co-parents, perfect pals. Category number 2, cooperative colleagues. These are moderate interactors, they're high communicators. These divorced parents cooperate, they consult with each other about the children, but they don't have a personal relationship with each other. You see, they compartmentalize their relationship. The marriage relationship is back here and it has ended. They only interact with each other in regards to the kids. Now, they have a good relationship. They don't argue for the most part. They're able to work out schedules. If there is tension, they're able to work through tension pretty well. They don't have to get the kids involved with decision making. They're able to communicate with one another. These cooperative colleagues really don't confuse these issues of the marriage that happened back here and parenting the kids that happens here. Two different things. That's what the cooperative colleagues are all about. Co-parent, category number 3, angry associates. These are moderate interactors, low communicators, because these co-parents, they feel angry most of the time. If they're going to have communication with one another, it's going to be tense. It's going to be hot. There's likely going to be a disagreement if they try to talk about anything in regards to the kids. Instead of being able to compartmentalize anger about the past, they let it spread into related and even non-related issues in regards to the kids. They talk to each other maybe every couple of months, maybe once or twice a week, and they do manage to make joint decisions about the kids, but it's a struggle. It's not uncommon for angry associates to sometimes work through perhaps what these wounds are back here from divorce, and maybe deal with some unforgiveness that they had, and begin to see their former spouse in a better light. And an angry associate relationship can move to a cooperative colleague. That is what we would want. Angry associates, this is not healthy for our kids. And we have to figure out, how do we get out of these positions of being angry all the time with our former spouse? I tell you that with compassion. I've been there. I didn't want to co-parent with my former spouse. I had a lot of hurt. I felt like he owed me something. He had wronged me hugely. And I was mad at him. But for the sake of my girls, I had to learn how to be in relationship with him in a way that wasn't angry all the time. Because what happens sometimes with these angry associates is they move into the next category, which is fiery foes. This is our fourth category of co-parents. These divorced parents rarely talk to each other. When they do, they're angry, they argue, they fight. Their divorces tended to be highly litigious. Perhaps it went on for years to try to work through the details of divorce. And these co-parents are non-interactors, they're low communicators. They don't want to see each other, they avoid each other as much as possible. And they often rely on a third party to settle any kind of disagreements. Maybe they even use their kids to try to settle disagreements or to work out visitation schedules. It's not healthy for our kids, even if they are older, even if they are teenagers and you think, oh, they can manage this communication. We don't want to put them in the middle of that. Our kids have been through a lot just to go through divorce. And then when they have to be the ones to be the buffer between their parents, it puts more of a burden on them. The last category of co-parents is dissolved duos. These are non-interactors, non-communicators. They totally disconnect from one another. They discontinue contact with one another. One parent usually disappears from the kids' lives altogether. They leave the geographical area and really one person becomes a single parent. Again, this is not good for our kids. Our kids need relationship with both parents. We may think it's easier. It would be easier on us if we didn't have to communicate with this ex-spouse. But it's not good for our kids. They need relationship with both parents, even if this other parent is dysfunctional. I know, I didn't want my girls to have a relationship with their dad. He was too dysfunctional. But they are part of him. He is their biological dad. And they still wanted to know something about him. Now sometimes things change, and for us, their dad was homeless for a few years. We didn't even know where he was. So there are times that circumstances change and we do have to walk into a single parent situation. But for the most part, this dissolved duos, and maybe we don't even have control of it, but this isn't the place that we would want to be in co-parenting relationship. Okay, I've given you 5 categories. I wonder if anybody would be brave enough to suggest which of these categories do you think would be best in regards to co-parenting? Anybody want to take a guess? Perfect pals, cooperative colleague, angry associate, fiery foes, dissolved duos. Yes?
The second one.
The second one, yes, you're right. We oftentimes think it would be the first one. We think perfect pals is the relationship we should have with a former spouse. No, that's confusing to kids. If we are perfect pals with them, why did we get divorced? That's what our kids are thinking. If it's okay for you to constantly be in relationship with this person, for the relationship to stay the same and they continue to do things for you, they come over and mow your yard, or they take care of everyday tasks for you, it's confusing for kids. Now, I'm not saying that you can't celebrate holidays together if that works for you. It didn't work for me. But for some, it does. And on occasion, to do birthday parties together. Yes, there are times that we all have to be in the same room together, but that doesn't mean you're a perfect pal. It doesn't mean that you're talking about everything that happens in your life with your former spouse, that they're there to meet your emotional needs. No, they're not. That was part of marriage. And once you're divorced, conversation really needs to take place that centers around the children. So the cooperative colleague is the category that we want to work toward. If you're not in that category now, it's okay. Oftentimes we have to cycle through these categories, and maybe we enter one and then we can go back to another. You know, my husband talks about how he and his former wife were in the angry associates for a long time. In fact, she could trigger him. That happens with an ex-spouse, doesn't it? They know how to push our buttons and send us over the edge. And we go back to being angry associates. But they did learn how to get along with each other in ways that they were able to be cooperative colleagues. You might cycle back and forth in these categories. But remember, the goal is to compartmentalize your relationship so that your conversation with your former spouse has to do with the kids. That's really the only thing that you need to be having a lot of conversation about. Doesn't mean that as your parents get older, if you were married a long time to somebody, I know when my dad died, my first husband had a relationship with him. He really respected my dad, and he wanted to talk to my dad before he died. And I arranged that phone call. I felt that would be good for both of them. For my former husband, he did have a conversation with my dad before dad died. And that just seemed a decent thing to do. That seemed for me the right thing to do. So there are no black and white answers to these things. And I'm not saying that you never have conversation outside of your kids about some other things, but that's not what dominates conversation. It needs to be in regards to our kids. Now, let's move into the goals of co-parenting and how we practically live those out. Co-parenting goal number 1, focus on the serenity prayer. Maybe you've heard this serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The rest of it goes like this: living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, taking this world as it is and not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will so that I might be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy in the next. This was a poem written by Ronald Nabar, and I think as we consider the goals of the Serenity Prayer, we can apply this to life after divorce. One of the consequences of divorce is we lose some control with our kids. We can't control how the parent parents our kids in another home. We can't control what they're exposed to. We can't control who comes into that home. We can't control how our kids are parented in that home. We can ask certain things. We can request things that we believe strongly about. But the truth is, when you're no longer married to a person, you lose some control when your kids are with that former parent. Years ago, when my stepson was a young teenager, he was living with us full time. And his mom lived a couple of hours away from us, and we would go back and forth on weekends. Usually my husband every other weekend would meet up and pick up his stepson and bring him to our house, and then he would be with us for a couple of weeks at a time. And my stepson was really struggling with asthma and allergies and sinus infections. He was sick all the time, and I had a hunch it had to do with the fact that his mom and stepdad both smoked. And Peyton's allergies were very significant, and taking him to the doctor one time, I was trying to explain this, that this is what I thought might be going on, and the doctor confirmed he is allergic to cigarette smoke, and he really should not be around cigarette smoke. And yet we couldn't control what was happening in his mom's house, but that doctor wrote a prescription out that said Peyton is not to be exposed to cigarette smoke. My husband took that prescription. The next time he saw his former wife, he gave that prescription to her and said, for the sake of Peyton's health, will you please consider not smoking in the house with Peyton, not smoking in the car with Peyton. You see, it seems like a little thing, but it's really not. And we could not control whether or not they would abide by that request. But we could do our part and ask what we knew was best for Peyton. Go back to the serenity prayer. God, grant me to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We could try to make a change with that. We could ask that they make a change with that. But then we had to let go. Sometimes it's hard to know, to have the wisdom, to know the difference. A favorite verse of mine, Romans 8, 5-6 says, "For those who are living according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh which gratify the body. But those who are living according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit, His will and purpose. And now the mind of flesh is death, both now and forever, because it pursues sin. But the mind of the Spirit is life and peace, the spiritual well-being that comes from walking with God both now and forever." I spoke a little bit in my first session about the importance of walking with God and how He will give us wisdom when we need it. James 1:5 talks about, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. There's a whole lot of things that happen after divorce that we need wisdom for. We need to know how to parent as a divorced parent now. We need to know how to manage this relationship. And we can ask God for wisdom. If you're familiar with the story in 1 Kings 3, Solomon asked God for wisdom. He was a young lad when he was put in a kingship position. He knew he didn't know how to do this role, and he asked God for wisdom. And if you go back and you read this story in 1 Kings 3, you'll see where Scripture tells us God was pleased that Solomon asked for wisdom. God is pleased when we ask Him for wisdom, when we are dependent on Him to find answers to the road that we're on. So that's the first goal of co-parenting. Focus on and practice living out the serenity prayer. And co-parenting goal number 2. Seek to maintain a friendly and cooperative relationship with your former spouse. Not one that is always tense and prickly. Our kids internalize this when our relationship is always tense and prickly with their other parent. Romans 12:18 says, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." Everyone, that includes a former spouse. But in order to do that, sometimes we need God's help. We might need to seek forgiveness and whatever happened prior to the divorce in order to live at peace with them. I heard a pastor say one time, unforgiveness is demanding that other people be perfect. And that's a standard that you cannot meet. We're not perfect. Our former spouse is not going to be perfect. We still have to learn how to be in relationship with them. Walking through forgiveness with my former spouse was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And it wasn't one and done. You don't forgive somebody and all of a sudden you decide you can just let go of everything that happened. Sometimes you have to walk through forgiveness more than once. But I finally realized that I was only hurting myself by allowing bitterness to feed my soul instead of asking God to help me walk in forgiveness and experience the peace and the joy that comes from that. What forgiveness is not, it is not denying that you've been hurt or that someone treated you badly. Forgiveness requires us to name it and say, that was wrong. You hurt me. For me, I needed to admit I was deeply wounded and I felt rejected when my ex-spouse chose to stay in addictive patterns with drugs and alcohol instead of committing to get sober and be part of our family. You might not be able to say it to your former spouse. You might need to process it with a counselor. And forgiveness does not mean we automatically trust again or that we're going to reconcile with them and be perfect pals. Forgiveness has to do with the past. Trust has to do with the future. We have to see changed behavior before we can trust a person again. What forgiveness is that we've let go of what happened to us. And we've forgiven that person for their behavior so that we can experience peace and freedom in ourselves. Now remember the why. It's for the sake of the kids that we put aside the differences that dissolved the marriage. Don't assume that a lousy marriage partner equals a lousy parent. It is possible to move beyond anger and pain to a positive and cooperative attitude in co-parenting. I have seen some really lousy marriage partners be incredible parents after divorce. That's what we would want for the sake of our kids. It doesn't always happen, but we always want to be careful about assuming that because they were a lousy marriage partner, they're gonna be a lousy parent. That doesn't always go hand in hand. Now, does positive co-parenting after divorce come naturally? No. It requires intentional effort and a lot of God-given grace. And when we remember we don't deserve the grace that God gives us, we more easily allow grace in other relationships. What does it look like to do our part toward a cooperative relationship? We work to reduce conflict. We speak respectfully about the other home, about our former spouse. Kids internalize critical comments that you make about their other parent. And it lowers their self-esteem because they are part of that parent. And if you say to them, your dad is always so lazy, then what they're hearing is, I must be lazy too. I love my dad. I'm part of my dad. Be careful about negative comments that you say about the former spouse to your kids. It's damaging. Scripture tells us to get rid of bitterness and wrath and slander. Ephesians 4:28 says, don't let mean and unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only that which builds others up. And that also includes a former spouse. My friend Tammy Daughtry has written a book titled Co-Parenting Works, Helping Your Children Thrive After Divorce. If you're looking for a good resource, I highly recommend her book. Tammy says children of divorce have one heart, but homes. One heart that is divided after divorce because their parents now live in two homes. It's a tough place to be. Having a friendly and cooperative relationship also means we give our kids permission to love those in another home. When they go to visit, we give them a kiss. We tell them, enjoy your time. We don't put them on the guilt trip. We don't tell them how sad we're going to be while they're gone. That puts too much burden on our kids. We take care of ourselves so that we can send them off with a message of, enjoy your time over there. I can't wait to see you when you come back home. Our kids are carrying enough burdens without having to carry our burdens also. Give them permission to love other people in another home. So that was the second goal of co-parenting. Seek to maintain a friendly and cooperative relationship with your former spouse. And remember the why. It is for the sake of the kids. Co-parenting goal number 3, recognize a healthy co-parent is a stable person. The practical details of co-parenting cannot happen smoothly in the midst of a toxic environment. The only way we can do this is if we control what we're thinking. It starts in our thoughts. So where's your focus? Do you think about the way they parent way too much? Do you criticize everything they're doing? Do you pick apart everything your former spouse does? Philippians 4:8 is all about our thoughts. It says, finally, believers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable and worthy of respect, whatever is right and confirmed by God's word, whatever is pure and wholesome, whatever is lovely and brings peace, whatever is admirable and of good repute. If there is any excellence, anything worthy of praise, think continually on these things. Center your mind on them and implant them in your heart. You see, our behavior stems from our thoughts. Dr. Charles Stanley says we sow a thought and we reap an action. We respond as a result of our thoughts. We sow an action and we reap a habit because we keep sowing the same action. We sow a habit and we reap a character because habits in our life determine our character. And we sow a character and we reap a destiny because this is who we are. Being a healthy co-parent starts with our thoughts. So take care of you. Find a counselor if you need to. It can make a huge difference. Practical issues that help keep us stable as co-parents. Perhaps wrestling with unforgiveness. I've talked about that one. If tension is high, exchange kids in a public place. Have you ever noticed that people are often more mature in public? They don't want to show that dysregulated side when there's other people around. So if you find that when the handoff is tense, perhaps consider doing it in a public place, not at your house. I rarely allowed my ex-husband to come to our house. I didn't trust him. Wasn't sure what kind of behavior might show up. And I was very careful with that. You want to have a congenial handoff? Perhaps be flexible in the schedule, especially, when you get to holidays or special days, graduations, weddings. All of those things carry a lot of stress. And we can be flexible, but we can also plan things ahead of time. Those are just some practical things that will help. Be businesslike with interactions. Leave the emotions out, if at all possible, when the kids are around. It really helps if they can see parents getting along for the sake of your kids. Heal yourself. Find a support network. Don't be in a position that your kids have to take care of you. They don't need that. They have their own burdens to carry. Take care of yourself. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And don't ask your kids to be spies. Don't ask a bunch of questions when they come back from the other home. Just simply, I'm glad to have you here. What do you want for dinner? Simple things. That's what our kids need from us. Now, where does our identity lie? It helps if we find our worth from God so that we don't seek it from another person. Maybe you have a critical ex-spouse who finds pleasure in demeaning you and bringing up things of the past that keep you defeated. In those situations, I encourage you to think about who God says we are. Titus 3:4-7 tells us we're loved and saved by God's mercy. We're heirs of God, which means we are a person of surpassing value, no matter what you've walked through. We might need to remind ourselves of that at times. Because when our worth as a person from God, when our worth as a person comes from God, we don't have to seek it from someone else. And co-parenting goal number 4, create and maintain healthy boundary setting. The reason boundaries work is because they don't depend on someone else, they depend on us and the decisions that we make in regards to how we're going to manage the people in our lives. So in our situation, I mentioned that my husband had a former spouse also, and his kids would go and visit her, and there was a time when they lived close to us, close in the same town, and I'll never forget the day that his former wife and his daughter, I was home, I was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and they were returning from a visit, and all of a sudden I see his former wife just parading through my kitchen. There had been no knock on the door. There had been no, "Hey, Gayla, are you home?" No. They just let themselves in. And there was his former wife in my house with no announcement. How do you think that went over for me? Now, I understand my stepdaughter, this was her home. She, yes, was allowed to come and go as she wanted. And because her mom was with her, then it seemed it was okay for both of them to come in with no introduction, no announcement. That was not okay with me. And I can tell you, when my husband came home that day, we had a discussion about it. I probably should have calmed down a little bit before I began to talk to him and say, "I am not okay with your ex-wife parading in our house at any given moment." And I put a boundary in place that day. Yes, my stepdaughter, it is her home. She can come and go as she wants. But if her mom is with her, I need to know when they come into our home. Think about what boundaries are important to you. Maybe that doesn't matter to you. Something else is important to you. Consider, what boundaries do you need to put in place so that you feel safe as you navigate other relationships? And we also want to be careful. We can put boundaries up in regards to conversation. So if our ex-spouse constantly wants to bring up conversation about things that happened in the past, we don't need to go there. Our conversation needs to center around the kids. Why do we need to still be talking about things that happened back here in the marriage when the marriage is dissolved? We want to keep the conversation around our kids, and we can put boundaries in place for that. So to wrap up our session, remember, 5 categories of co-parents. Where do you fall? What do you need to do to get in a better category, perhaps? What steps do you need to take? And then consider the goals of co-parenting and what you need to do to practically live them out. Focus on the serenity prayer. Accept the things we cannot change. Have the courage to change the things we can. And seek wisdom to know the difference. Seek to maintain a cooperative relationship with your former spouse. Try not to be tense and prickly all the time. Our kids see that, and it becomes a burden for them to figure out how to get mom and dad to have a better relationship. They don't need that burden. Recognize that a healthy co-parent is a stable person. I gave you several things that you might need to consider to be a healthy, stable person for yourself. What steps do you need to take? And understand healthy boundary setting. Are there some boundaries that you need to put up? Not walls. When we put up walls, there's no communication. I'm not saying that. What boundaries do you need to put in place as you navigate these relationships? And remember, co-parenting, wow, is important. We do the hard stuff to create a healthy co-parenting relationship for the sake of the kids. I encourage you, do the hard stuff for the sake of the kids. You'll be glad you did. Thank you.